I know almost everybody here, but if you don't know me, my name is Carrie Miller. I'm the Vice President of Advancement here. And we're really pleased to be able to kick off what we're calling a Leadership Perspective series. And the idea is that we are going to give our trustees and 1869 Society donors deeper perspectives on what's happening at Chatham. The first one being Lou Leonard, who I know many of you are interested to hear from today. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. David Feingold in just a moment, but just a housekeeping tip or two here is if you have questions during the conversation, you are welcome to put them in the chat and even just say, I have a question, or wait until we move to the question and answer portion. And you can raise your hand by hitting the reaction button, wave your arms, whatever it may be, and Dana will call on you. While we're getting started here, we just ask that you keep yourself muted so we don't have a whole bunch of dogs in the background. Ask me how I know, but we're really glad to have all of you here today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Feingold.
Hello, everyone. Great to be with you. I won't take up a lot of your time because I know you're here today to hear from Lou Leonard and have a chance to ask him your questions. Just to say we're so delighted this summer when Lou and his wife Rachel were able to made the decision to join the Chatham community. We did a large, actually international search for this position. And the committee was so impressed by Lou's diverse background. I'm sure he'll share some of that with you, but coming most recently from the World Wildlife Fund, where he led their climate change practice, and the We're Still In campaign, which we're right today seeing the impact of with the national campaign, many of the people involved in that now working within the Biden administration. And so we feel like this is a wonderful time for Chatham to have him with his unique set of talents on board. He's been off to a great start in getting to know, in these very challenging circumstances during the pandemic, getting to know the faculty, staff, students at Eden Hall and in the Falk School. And I'm really glad you have this opportunity to hear from him. So Lou, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And it is a real pleasure to be able to be with you today. And I wanted to start out by thanking you because you are helping me to celebrate a milestone. As you can see, I've been on Zoom a little bit too long. I know how to use really fun features of Zoom, but this is just about exactly, we're maybe about a week off, but just about exactly my 6-month birthday as a member of the Chatham community. So it's fun to be able to celebrate that with you, and I won't make you look at that little hat for any longer. But I think, you know, it really has been kind of a wild ride, a wild time to make a move from one part of the country to another, to make a move to a new job, you know, to do obviously all of this, not only during a pandemic that's affecting kind of our regular daily lives, but that has so fundamentally created challenges for, you know, for university, higher ed communities, educators across all levels across the world. So kind of a wild time, but I think, you know, what I've been really impressed with now over these first, you know, 6 months is, and just like pleased by, is how we have been able to keep each other safe, how we've been able to do as much of our work as we have over the course of this first kind of term and a half. And I think it really is a testament to how seriously the university has taken this moment, how creatively we've approached it. And of course, Eden Hall brings us some really extra, you know, sort of advantages in those moments, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But yeah, and I think that the other thing that has been, you know, I think we all have learned from this time is, you know, it's really helped us clarify our, you know, our priorities, the things that are important. Some of the other things have really dropped away, and I think, you know, obviously things like our health and our family, our families, and those connections. But also another thing that was important to me before I moved here and has been really important since is our connection to place and to land. And this is probably just a good a time as any for me to share my screen. I'm just going to share a few slides as I talk, and then we're going to have a bunch of time at the end where we can ask questions. But I thought I would begin with that idea of place and that connection to the land, and how supportive I think that's been to all of us in different ways, or so many of us at least in different ways, and it certainly has for me. This picture I actually took last night as I was leaving campus. You can see my wife Rachel and our little dog Pecan, not so little dog Pecan, kind of off to the right. But it was gorgeous up there last night, and you know, those of you who know how Eden Hall is different in all the seasons, but beautiful at all times, and it's been a real support for me. So what are we going to do today? Before we get to the questions part, which will be the fun part, I thought I would just give you a refresher on some of the basics of the Falk School. I'll give you a little bit about me. You all have read some of the the announcements and things, so I'm not going to dwell on that. You'll get to know me as we talk about these things, and if there's any questions that you want to ask at the end about me, on any subject, I'm excited to talk. Always excited to talk about me, so don't worry about that. But you'll drive that rather than me. I wanted to give you an update on how, kind of what's going on at the Falk School and Eden Hall, including over this unprecedented time of the last 6 months, and then just really kind of kick off the discussion with kind of a few ideas as we look ahead to the world, sort of hopefully as we begin to emerge out of at least the core part of the pandemic, and see what the world looks like kind of on the other side. So maybe before I do the next slide, so me, as a reminder, I'm David, I appreciate that sort of kind introduction. I'm a lawyer by training. I've been out of grad school now for almost 25 years, 24 years this year, and have had somewhat of a kind of a windy road over the course of that time. I spent about 5 years in the federal government, seeing Deb Haaland's confirmation hearings for Secretary of the Interior this week brought some of that time back for me in the late 90s when I was at the Interior Department doing Native American water rights and Western conservation issues. Spent about 5 years in the private sector in San Francisco at a big global law firm, did energy and land use law, big utility companies, other developments, a robust sort of pro bono nonprofit practice as well. Spent 2 years, about 18 months actually, in East Africa, in Tanzania, on a Fulbright senior scholarship where I taught law to grad and undergrad students, and worked with community partners there on conservation issues, which is actually where I got introduced to World Wildlife Fund. I came back to the US, spent about a year working on a presidential campaign in 2008 that broke some ground and led to a new president, and then 11 years at World Wildlife Fund, as David said, leading the climate change and energy programs there. And really a lot of what we did was build partnerships that could have an impact, partnerships with the private sector, partnerships that could connect the private sector with cities and universities and others to drive change, science-based partnerships to connect what's happening on climate change with conservation, and really trying to build more of a movement for change across those issues. So let's move on to the sort of refreshing the basics part of this presentation. So I only have one slide for you, but it's a reminder of the programs that we have at the graduate and undergraduate level. The graduate programs, as you know, are the foundation and the backbone of this school. They came first. We have a mix of sustainability and food studies master's programs, and over the last few years have been experimenting with this dual degree that combines our master's of both sustainability and food studies with a master's of business administration. And that's been a really popular program, and we get some really great students that choose that track. and it's a great partnership between the School of Art, Sciences, and Business and the Falk School. But more recently, we've really been focused on the undergraduate experience at the Falk School and Eden Hall. And it's an exciting time for that part of our work. So obviously undergrads, they bring such energy and community, and that's a really important part of what we're building at Eden Hall. Obviously, they're really an important part of the business model for the university. So bringing in that pipeline of students really helps us kind of stabilize the business model of the school. And now actually starting this fall, we're going to have 3 undergraduate programs at the Falk School in Eden Hall. And so I just wanted to give you a peek at some of the numbers there. These 3 programs are Bachelors of Sustainability, which we've had from the beginning, a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science, which has been sort of incubating within the science department for a while. But over the last couple of years, we've really focused on it being a partnership between the Falk School and the science department, the broader science department, and put a lot more attention on it from a recruiting standpoint and otherwise, kind of a program, the shape of the program and the curriculum. And we've seen great benefits. You can see that on the kind of the top bar chart here, which shows the growth of that undergraduate program over time. And then the Bachelor's of Sustainability is the lower bar chart, and that you can see kind of a very clear and steady sort of growth trajectory, a little leveling off this year during the pandemic, but overall kind of really pointed in the right direction. And then this fall, we will have our first cohort of a Bachelor's of Food Studies, which will allow us to then have this combination of a bachelor's and a master's in both sustainability and food studies. And we've got some really great candidates in that cohort. I think we have about 10 students so far that we've admitted. We're still in the process of wooing and turning those admits into commitments. But it's attracting folks from around the country, which is exciting and actually consistent with our food studies master's program. So I thought what I would do, I want to talk about three examples of what's happening at Eden Hall and bring it to life a little bit with some stories. So one of the most important things that we do at the Falk School in Eden Hall, and I think it's really important for the movement for societal change that we're about at the school, is envisioning the future, envisioning a sustainable future, and helping folks see that it is exciting and can be beautiful. And yeah, sometimes it's messy to get there, but what does it really mean to get there? So I think that role for the school is so very important. And I wanted to bring it to life with the words of one of our great grad students. This is Nelson, and he's actually in that joint degree with the MBA and the the Masters of Sustainability that I mentioned, and he's amazing. So let's listen to him for a second.
A microgrid is essentially, I guess you could say, it's like a smaller power plant. It's all sourced locally. A lot of your houses and everything are all hooked up to the main grid. A microgrid pretty much provides a locally sourced area with power, and oftentimes the power source is through renewable energy. Like the microgrid that we recently installed, it's powered through solar and wind.
Oops.
A microgrid is essentially,
Sorry about that.
I guess you could say, it's like a smaller power plant. It's all sourced locally. A lot of your houses and everything are all hooked up to the main grid. A microgrid pretty much provides a locally sourced area with power, and oftentimes the power source is through renewable energy. Like the microgrid that we recently installed, it's powered through solar and wind. The microgrid on Eden Hall's campus was essentially built with a wind stack and solar panels, and that all goes and feeds into a battery. The wind stacks is a 20-foot tall structure that has a 1 kilowatt rating, and the solar panels have around a 1500 watt rating, and those are located on top of our battery shed. And so both of those supply this battery with energy that has an inverter in it that changes it from DC current to AC. And with that, we're able to provide the field with power. It's essentially hooking up this field to the grid, yet it's all sourced internally. Renewable energy offers a great way to lower your carbon footprint without completely shifting your behavior. And I really think it's a great opportunity to kind of help shift the whole carbon footprint and the whole environmental impact of society as a whole through renewable energies.
So sorry about that little glitch there, but kind of an amazing project, and even more amazing that it was led by a grad student. So you may know that this isn't the first microgrid that we actually have on campus. All of the energy systems that knit together our new buildings on campus are also a microgrid, a mix of geothermal and solar. But this addition of this second microgrid allows us to bring power in a renewable way to the farm, which doesn't otherwise have power out there. And WindStacks is a Pittsburgh company, which is great because it's a way to connect our students with a local industry and also support that industry. And we're also in the process. We have a part of a grant program with the Commonwealth and the U.S. Green Building Council to pilot a certification training program for microgrids. So we're not only building this, but we're building curricula around it, and we're going to help kind of spread microgrid certification and best practices around the country. Kind of another thing about building the future that I just wanted to touch on briefly. Many of you may have heard about, of course, the Rachel Carson Eco Village. Just wanted to let you know that that is moving forward. We've now we're working with the sort of community that's building out that project on the regulatory approvals, so the local township land use approvals, and it's really been great to also just begin to connect that group of that sort of multi-generational community that is really going to add to the sustainability laboratory aspect of Eden Hall, and to connect them into the community of Eden Hall more. So we've been having meetings between those folks and our faculty and staff and students. We've already got students doing master's projects linked to the Eco Village. So it's going to be, I think, a really great addition to the campus. Depending on how all the remaining approvals go, groundbreaking would be, about a year from now. In addition to sort of kind of imagining and living in the future, I think what's so important about what we're doing up at Eden Hall, and I think that's such an important sort of component of a sustainable future, is community. And I love this picture because on the right, you see actually a old postcard that we found on eBay of the lodge at Eden Hall in the 1960s, when it was, when the lodge and the what's now the campus was a retreat center for working women in the Heinz factory, and in the community that was really so supported by that land, this community of working women, and the picture on your left is the newly opened Food Innovation Lab, which is in that same space in the lodge, and it's a reminder of the importance of food really as as community, and such the kind of the great job that our food studies program does at building community with our students across the campuses, but also with community partners through CRAFT, the Center for Regional Agricultural and Food Transformation. I think we have a link to the CRAFT website, so you can kind of take a look at some of the things that they've been doing during the pandemic, and it's been a lot actually of bringing resources together for folks in the food space. And sort of rekindling community, building community is not just kind of on campus, but also how we can use food and other aspects of our program to build community outside. So we've launched a program this year, kind of the early stages of a program on modeling small-scale intensive organic agriculture production. And the first step of that is connecting with other small organic farms in the region, both urban farms in Pittsburgh, but also farms that are closer to where the Eden Hall campus is, to do research together about biointensive organic production, to both look at the business model for it, but also some of the soil science and other issues. And then, kind of another aspect of what's important about the Falk School in Eden Hall, and an update on what's happening now, is our relationship to the land. And I think that we need a stronger relationship to this land, actually, as part of the work of the Falk School. And we're already doing a lot, of course, with our buildings and the farm, but the campus is more than those things. It's 388 acres, most of which is undeveloped. So especially with a Bachelor's of Environmental Science kind of more fully coming into our community, it is important that we are able to get out into the land of campus, use it for research and other activity, and it requires us to have a more professional system of trails, so that we're actually not degrading the land as we try to use it and work on it. So that's a big part of what we're doing, and we have a grant from the Commonwealth to do a design process for a new sustainable master plan for the trail system, and we're nearing the end of that design process. We've done a bunch of public meetings on it, engaged with the neighbors, and then going forward, we'll take that design and move into an implementation phase, which we'll do with students and other partners. So that's an important part of what's going on. So before we open up to questions, kind of, we're in this unprecedented time. So what does it mean for our work? What does it mean for society, the society that we at the Falk School in Chatham speak a lot about trying to support and help transform? And I do think about the world right now in terms of three pandemics. The coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic, and what it's taught us about vulnerability, our vulnerability, not just our health, but also the vulnerability of our food systems, the vulnerability of our global supply chains, and what that is going to, how that's going to change the world for everything else, and what we need to learn from that, I think. And then, the second pandemic of inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality, economic inequality, and how that plays out in urban and rural settings, and the way that all of those aspects come together in this region so powerfully. It's like we cannot escape the reality of that second pandemic if we wanted to, because we are at the crossroads in Western Pennsylvania of all of those things, and certainly Eden Hall is too. So thinking about what that means for us, and I think that there's a lot that it points to about what's next. And then, of course, the third pandemic being the climate crisis, and as a leading edge of the larger ecological sort of crisis that we're facing. And in some ways, this is the biggest of all in terms of its potential to fundamentally change who we are, and what it requires of us, right? It requires us to rewire our entire society in a way that we've never done before, rewire both literally and sort of metaphorically speaking, but do it while protecting ourselves from growing insecurity. And again, getting back to this sort of vulnerability. What does that mean for us as we go forward? And I do have this picture of the California wildfires here, but I could just as easily have shown this picture because vulnerability is not just about some of the things we traditionally think about with respect to climate change, that are fires and sea level rise and torrential rainstorms and their effects, but it's also the instability of our broader global system, like the jet stream, which basically blew apart over the last few weeks, and let all of this sort of Arctic air down to the rest of the country, and Texas was exhibit A of kind of the vulnerability of the combination of the renewable energy transition and vulnerability to climate impacts. So what does this mean for us? I think this is the conversation that I'd like to have with you all, and it's the conversation that we are having within campus. But just to kind of say, real quickly on the COVID pandemic, there is some important stuff that we're doing, and I think we have a link to the Allegheny Eats project, which is a partnership between Sustainable Pittsburgh and Chatham and the Craft Center at Chatham to help bring jobs and food to food insecure parts of the Pittsburgh area, and in particular, folks that have lost their job within the restaurant industry because of the way that the pandemic has decimated that industry. So it's a kind of a generously sort of foundation funded program that where people can also contribute, individuals can contribute, and we can bring meals from restaurants that are under kind of used right now to food insecure communities, including folks that have lost their job within that sector. So there's work that we're already doing in that area. Obviously on inequality, there's a lot that we've been doing for a while within our community at Chatham. We're at the university level, kind of looking at kind of a larger diversity, equity, inclusion strategic plan, and really thinking within the Falk School about what that means for our programs, and obviously on climate and really all of these pandemics. The question is, how do we build back? The way President Biden talks about is building back better. What does that mean? And what does that mean for us as a school in terms of fostering career paths and job opportunities that align with this sustainable transition? And we've been doing a lot of thinking about that recently, and excited to talk to you more about it. So I want to stop here, kind of open it up, allow us to have a conversation, but really kind of really appreciate this opportunity for you to celebrate my 6-month birthday.
Happy 6-month birthday, Dean Leonard. My name is Dana DePasquale, and I am proud to serve as Chatham's Director of Individual Giving. I'm also a graduate alumna, class of 2017. Thank you so much for joining us. This officially begins the Q&A portion of our session together, and I'm pleased to see we already have some questions in the chat box. Feel free to continue using the chat box or raise your hand using the reactions feature, or just kind of wave and I'll probably catch you on one of these Zoom screens. So Dean Leonard, we're going to start with that chat box question. First of which was from Stacy Desai. She would like you to elaborate on community engagement. She understands that your programs are designed to educate students, but using craft as an example, how are they engaging the community?
Great. So thanks for that question, and we could take the rest of the time answering it. So let me do a couple of things, and then we can talk more. We can talk more about this. So the power of a Falk school education, in my mind, is it offers you these two really important aspects of training. One is an interdisciplinary understanding of society and how it works, and the interplay between physical sciences, social sciences, culture, politics, economics. But it is built upon experiential learning to go deep in getting after real world problems. We had an open house this morning for students that had been admitted to our undergrad program. And the way I said it to them was, we don't have time to be dealing with hypothetical problems that, that we make up in order to create a learning experience. We got problems today, and that we can use as a way for students to get practical experience in the real world, and learn at the same time, and and support our communities. So a couple of examples. One, the Food Innovation Lab. So we just saw that picture of the transformed kitchen in the lodge. That is the center of a learning space called the Food Innovation Lab, where we bring community groups and entrepreneurs into the classroom and offer them the opportunity to bring their challenges into a kind of a student consulting space. And that's led by an instructor who has experience out in the working world, and then they use that lab as a way to help solve problems, but also help give students a learning experience. Another example, there's a project called the Oasis Project, which is an effort in Homewood, in the Homewood neighborhood of Pittsburgh, associated with one of the sort of foundational churches in the neighborhood that does practical skills training around urban farming and fisheries. So we have a partnership with them where we bring students in to helping them design kind of the next phase of their food training program and their urban gardening project. And we link them and the students in our aquaculture lab to the fish farming part of what Oasis does. So, we're working with the town of Mars on some challenges they have around developing their, kind of river or stream front, creek front. So basically, our learning model is constructed around experiential learning that's built with community partnerships.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Dean Leonard. Rebecca, I noticed your hand up. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Well, I actually took my hand down because you so eloquently answered my question without me asking it. But I was interested in, as someone who's approached so oftenly by students and young professionals on sustainability studies and various tracks of study, I was interested in learning about what kind of experiential learning is highlighted, which you did so eloquently. Thank you. My other question was kind of around the 3 undergraduate tracks, and you somewhat answered that too. If someone's asking what are the differences, what is each undergraduate track, and where would each of those lead you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and also really reminds me again of this morning's meeting with admitted undergrad students, where of course, like that's what they want to know. Not only like what are these different tracks and how could I choose between them, but also like if I do choose one or the other, what does this mean in terms of our, what the future would be for me in terms of internships and employment and things like that. And their parents are also particularly interested in that last point about future employment. So I think having these 3 undergraduate degree programs now fully kind of launched within the school is a really important moment for getting after this question, Rebecca, because you'll have this choice and how to understand, because there are connections between these different programs, right? So we have to get good at helping students and others understand the distinctions. So let's take sustainability and environmental science as one sort of example and connection point. So the Bachelor's of Sustainability has a number of tracks. It has a urban and energy systems track. It has a sustainable business track. It has a natural resources management track. And then we also have a flexible track that allows students to basically, together with their advisor, design a path that allows them to connect different pieces that fit their own interests. But the natural resources track really leans heavily into physical sciences. So that is for the students that want to really be much closer to the resources in terms of the jobs that they would have, whether it might be, in conservation, working for government or a nonprofit, kind of land trust or conservation, or even a private sector organization that needs to do, sort of land remediation and other things where your work is going to bring you really closely in touch with the resource. And you need a strong science foundation in order to do that. But you really want to be more, where your tendencies are is a little bit more to the systems level connections between science and policy and economics. So, you're more interested in that, in that kind of not being in the dirt the whole time, but actually sort of connecting to more of the, the sort of organizational decision making and some of those pieces. So that's somebody who would be in the natural resources track, as opposed to in the Bachelor's of Environmental Science. So if you really want to go deep and where your mind and heart lights up is kind of getting in the weeds on some of these problems, kind of whether it's related to soil science or environmental chemistry. We have great green chemistry class that we share with the science department, where we use the wastewater treatment facility at Eden Hall to help folks understand kind of sustainable practices for treating wastewater that don't require you to add greatly to the load of municipal wastewater systems. So yeah, it's about helping students understand, like, okay, you could either be in the natural resources management track of the Bachelor's of Sustainability, or you could be in the undergrad Bachelor's of Environmental Science. What's the difference? And I think one last thing I'll say on this is all of these degrees, and I think this is what makes Chatham special related to this, these topics. All of these are degrees that have a foundation in a liberal arts education. And the important thing about that, and this I also was talking to the admitted students this morning about, we need to, I think, move beyond, if we're going to create the next generation of leaders in sustainability and societal transformation, we need to understand that having folks stuck in their silos and only able to talk to people who are in their areas of discipline does not allow us to produce the leaders that society needs. So all of these degrees, even the Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science, have that liberal arts foundation around communication and social sciences. And then the Bachelor's of Sustainability and Food have those to an even greater degree, right? They touch on physical sciences, but they're more, and they do a lot of that experiential learning that we've talked about, but they're more, kind of leaning into the interdisciplinary kind of liberal arts foundation of these issues. So I think those are the leaders that society needs. We at least need more of those kind of leaders. And I think that that's how those undergraduate programs are designed, and we're helping students understand the value of that.
Perfect, thank you.
Dean Leonard, there is some buzz in the chat about microgrid usage. Jennifer, you mentioned you had a question in the chat. Would you like to share that?
Sure. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Great. Well, this springs largely out of my own ignorance, but I'm very curious about the application of the microgrid technology. What's your vision for how far it could go and what sort of sectors it would be most useful for?
Thanks for the question, Jennifer. And I think that so there are a number of things that I think, a number of values that we get out of it from an educational perspective and a piloting perspective that I think could be useful to society at large. So one thing is, we know that, and this is one of the criticisms you often hear about renewable energy. Well, the sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing. How can we rely on renewables? So one benefit of having an interconnected grid, and this isn't just microgrid, this is the grid as a whole too, the sort of macro grid, is that when you're able to make use in a blended way of different kinds of energy sources, then it makes the overall reliability of your supply stronger, and then that gets at some of those questions that people are pointed to when they're sort of maybe raising questions about renewables. So especially so that's one benefit to society as a whole. And on the microgrid side, it allows us to experiment with being not reliant, primarily on the interconnected power supplies for time. So, for example, the Eden Hall campus is at the very edge of the Allegheny of the Duquesne Light Company sort of service area. So we sometimes end up losing power a little bit more often than others do. So having ways to experiment with that locally supplied power in a way that's integrated with different sources is important. Yeah, maybe I'll leave it there, but maybe I'll just say one more thing. As we see more experimentation with microgrids, there are safety issues associated with how you manage different energy systems together in one small scale system, right? It's one thing if you're the utility company and you're managing grid and you have all of those capacities and infrastructure, but if you're managing that on a smaller scale, you also need to know about some of those challenges. And I'm just quite frankly learning about some of them myself as we go through this certification process with the program I mentioned earlier with the Commonwealth and the U.S. Green Building Council. But that's an important part. If you're going to have more folks managing power supplies locally, we need to make sure that it's done safely and that you understand how those systems interact with each other.
Thank you for speaking more to microgrids. Trustee Joanne Lapson asks, can you talk to some of the jobs that our graduates are now in, both undergrad and grad? What percentage are working in the sustainability field or related?
So great question, thanks. I think that so I have actually, I anticipated this question. So I have some, let me see if I can, while we're talking, I could even kind of pull up a couple of slides so you can look at some examples while I'm talking of careers across the different kind of programs. So let me do one more attempt at a screen share, and then I'll speak to this also. So I think the reason why it's difficult, and you're seeing on this first slide some of the careers that graduates in our food studies program have gone on to, and then I'll just flip through a couple of other slides so you can look at some of the others. One of the challenges of identifying percentages is that sustainability is by its nature a cross-cutting discipline. So being able to say, oh, I'm in a sustainability field, or I'm in another field and bringing kind of sustainability principles and systems thinking and expertise, it's sort of a gray area. So I don't actually have, and I can see how we could crunch some of the numbers and offer some perspective on this, because I think the question's a good one, right? Sort of like, are students actually going into the things that we're training them for? That's how I understand the question, and I think that's really good for us to keep an eye on. But I would say that it's hard to draw a hard line between what is sustainability and what is not, and I think that we want to prepare our students so that they don't, the only jobs that they're prepared for, we don't want them to be the ones that have sustainability in the name, right? We want students to be prepared for being change agents in the broadest sense of the word within society and in institutions, even if they don't have a job that has that sustainability label on it. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Dean Leonard. And we officially have reached almost that 12:45 mark. Dean Leonard, are you comfortable with me sharing your email address in case any of our participants today have further questions for you?
Of course, I'm comfortable.
Excellent. I will share that in the chat. Thanks so much. And Dr. Feingold, I'm going to pass it to you to conclude our Zoom today.
Well, actually, I wanted to conclude by asking Lou one last question, which is you did a wonderful job, I think, of capturing some of the great stuff that's happening at Eden Hall and the Falk School, but wanted you to reflect on one or two things you and Rachel have really enjoyed about transplanting from DC to Pittsburgh, and how you found Steel City. Obviously not the greatest time for exploring a new place, but would love to hear what have been some of the highlights for you so far.
Yeah, president's prerogative. You can always ask the last question. So good question, and let's bring it back to like Lou, the human being, not the talking head sustainability dude. So we love Pittsburgh. I did not have a deep background in the area. Really, very little. I used to come here when I was a student athlete in undergrad, and I was on the swim team, and we would the Big East at that time was different than the Big East is now, but the swimming and diving championships were always at Pitt. So I would come to Pittsburgh in February every year, and it always seemed kind of gray and cold and rainy, basically. And I was like, but we have just loved it, and it's really hard, as you say, to even get the full sense of Pittsburgh in these times. But so Rachel and I, we bought a house in the Friendship neighborhood. So we live in the East End, and then I'm commuting up to Eden Hall on a kind of daily basis. But maybe what I would say is back to what I said before about the power of the region being at so many of these crossroads. Like, I love that. I wanted to move from DC to a place where it mattered, basically where these challenges that we talk about a lot are really hitting the ground with communities. And it's like, we've got it all here in Pittsburgh. We got a great food scene. I love that. We've got this rural, kind of urban interface. We've got great opportunities and challenges around sort of, kind of racial equality and sort of remedying past injustices. And we have just within Chatham these beautiful campuses that bring those different aspects of Pittsburgh to life. So it's been really fun. The dog loves it. She loves being out in all the kind of parks and other opportunities to be outside, which is really important to Rachel and I. So we're looking forward to getting to know it a little bit better when things start to lift, but we couldn't be happier with the choice.
And just so everyone understands that Lou is actually living what we're teaching, he makes that commute out to Eden Hall in an all-electric BMW, and he had his own charging station installed in Friendship. So he's practicing what he preaches, and as you can see, has been just a great addition to the Chatham campus. So Lou, thanks so much for kicking off this series. Carrie, Dana, do you want to share anything on the next one that's coming, just to let people know?
And before you do that, I just want to make sure people know it's a used 2014 BMW i3 that I got for $13,000. So they're not paying me too much, and I'm not wasting my money on high-tech gadgets.
And making sure the car got recycled. So it's all good.
Oh my goodness. Well, we hope to see all of you again on Thursday, March 25th. We will be joining with the program director of the counseling psychology program, as well as one of their associate professors. So Dr. Mary Jo Loughran and Dr. Deanna Hamilton, similar Zoom setup. So we hope to see you all on Thursday, March 25 at noon. I think it's EDT at that point. And in the chat, I just included the link to register. So thank you so much for joining. And thank you again, Dean Leonard. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.